Barely adequate documentation from barely qualified staff. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 48 minutes before a Black Hawk landed on his hospital. Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah smells like antiseptic and burnt coffee at 2 a.m. Ashley Cooper moves through the ICU like smoke, her hand steady as she preps a 14-gauge for line, the fluorescent lights catching faint burn scars on her forearms. Her badge reads A. Cooper, RN in letters so small they're almost invisible. She keeps a tarnished challenge coin in her left scrub pocket, the metal worn smooth by 6 years of fingertips, the insignia barely visible anymore. She touches it whenever she passes the vending machines. Muscle memory. A talisman. A reminder that she was something once, before the Navy erased her name from every database and handed her a discharge papers stamped classified and told her to disappear. Her central line insertions are too precise. Her suture work too clean. Her knowledge of hemodynamics too deep for someone who only has a bachelor's degree and 3 years on the floor. But she keeps her head down and her voice quiet, and that strategy has worked for 6 years until Dr. Whitfield arrived 3 months ago with his Italian wool suits and his smile like a wolf showing teeth and his particular talent for making invisible people visible only to humiliate them. Cedar Creek Medical is a 287-bed tertiary care facility with a Level 3 trauma center and a cardiac intensive care unit that serves 12 counties across Georgia and South Carolina. It has good outcomes, which is why nobody has asked too many questions about the phantom billing codes that have been cycling through the ICU admissions for 18 months. Inflated charges for procedures never performed. Diagnostic tests ordered but not run. Consultations coded to physicians who never stepped foot in patient rooms. Dr. Whitfield has been careful. Very careful. But careful people make mistakes when they think the people around them are too stupid to notice. Ashley notices everything. She's in bed 7 at 2:48 a.m., checking the potassium level on a 74-year-old man post-op from triple bypass, when she sees the billing code attached to his chart. ECMO consultation, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, the most expensive cardiac intervention that exists, costing upward of $4,000 a day. The man never had an ECMO. The cardiologist never came. She saw the chart every shift. She saw the monitor. She saw him walk to the bathroom on his own at midnight. But there's the code, and there's another one from the day before, and another from the day before that, $3,000 a phantom diagnosis stretching back across the entire unit. She doesn't report it. Not yet. She's learned that reporting things gets you fired, gets you investigated, gets you dragged into depositions where lawyers ask questions about your past and your paperwork and where exactly you earned your credentials, and she cannot afford that kind of light. So instead she watches. She documents. She photographs the billing sheets on her phone during breaks, running them through a simple encryption protocol she remembers from a different life. Dr. Whitfield arrives for morning rounds at 6:13 a.m., his expensive loafers clicking on the tile floor with the precise cadence of a man who knows he owns the space he's walking through. He's tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of jawline that belongs in a country club photograph, and his hair is so precisely styled it looks painted on. He moves through the ICU with 20 people trailing behind him, residents, interns, medical students, nurses, a parade of white coats and stethoscopes and the kind of wide eyes that belong to people who still think medicine is about saving lives. Rounds, he says, and the word sounds like a gunshot in the quiet morning. Ashley is hanging a new fur bag on the pole above bed for a 63-year-old woman admitted with acute myocardial infarction. Her hands move on their own, muscle memory so deep it doesn't require consciousness. Place the bag. Check the drip rate. Verify the line security. Move to the next patient. But she hears the thunder of footsteps and feels the air pressure change as Whitfield's entourage sweeps into the unit, and she doesn't look up. Invisibility is a choice. She chooses it. Let's discuss the post-MI protocol, Whitfield says, and suddenly the group is moving toward bed 4, toward the woman Ashley was just treating, and Ashley steps back into the corner where the wall meets the supply cabinet, a position she's practiced for 6 years. Fade into the background. Become part of the architecture. The heart monitor beeps its mechanical rhythm above the bed, and Whitfield picks up the patient chart. "This charting is sloppy," he says, and he's not talking to anyone in particular, just announcing it to the universe. He holds the chart up, and it's not even Bed 4's chart. It's Ashley's work from the night shift, a comprehensive set of vital signs, medication administration times, and nursing assessment notes that documents the patient's response to treatment every single hour for the past 12 hours. Look at this. Barely adequate documentation from barely qualified staff. The resident nearest to him makes a small sound. A snicker. A nervous laugh that's not quite sure if it's allowed but is taking the chance anyway. Another intern grins. Whitfield continues, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire ICU, loud enough that the other nurses hear it, loud enough that it echoes off the beige walls like an accusation. This is what happens when we hire people who don't belong in critical care. Sloppy. Imprecise. The kind of work that gets patients killed and hospitals sued. He turns the chart around so everyone can see Ashley's handwriting. Frankly, I'd be better suited to emptying bedpans. The air in the ICU goes very still. The ventilator on bed 2 continues its mechanical wheeze. The monitor on bed 6 continues its electronic beeping. But 20 people have stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped existing as active participants in the world. Ashley's jaw tightens. Just barely. Just enough that someone watching very carefully might see the muscle clench once, then release. Her face is a mask. Professional calm. The kind of expression that comes from swallowing so much rage and humiliation for so many years that it stops registering as emotion and becomes instead a kind of internal pressure, a constant weight behind the sternum, a thing to be managed like a chronic condition. She doesn't argue. She doesn't defend herself. She doesn't even move. She just watches from her corner, her hands still, her breathing controlled, her face a blank slate. Whitfield finishes his rounds and moves on to the next bed, and the world slowly restarts. The beeping resumes its meaning. The footsteps resume their purpose. Ashley returns to her patients. By 7:27 a.m., the day shift is arriving, and Ashley is giving report to the incoming nurse on bed 7. Her voice is measured. Professional. No tremor. No edge. Just a calm recitation of vital signs and medication times and what happened during the night. Post-op day 3. Potassium holding steady. Pain control adequate with the current regimen. Monitor for any signs of arrhythmia. Cardiologist rounding at 9. The day shift nurse nods and takes the chart, and Ashley moves toward her locker to collect her things. But she passes the vending machines first, and she stops for maybe 15 seconds, and she hears the voices from around the corner. 2 interns, both male, both laughing with the particular cruelty of people who are certain they are correct. "Did you hear what Whitfield said?" one of them asks. "About the nurse. Better suited to emptying bedpans." The other one laughs. "I mean, how does someone that slow even pass her boards? That charting was illegible. Right? Like, the handwriting alone. It's like watching a third grader trying to write in cursive." Ashley's hand finds the challenge coin in her scrub pocket. Her fingers close around it. The metal is cool. Smooth. A weight. A reminder. She doesn't turn around. She doesn't confront them. She just stands there, her jaw clenched so tight it aches, her breathing controlled, her face still turned away. When she pulls her hand from her pocket, the coin comes with it for just a moment, old, tarnished, barely legible, the kind of thing only someone who knew what it meant would recognize as anything other than trash. She looks at it. Then she puts it back. Then she walks toward the locker rooms, and the 2 interns continue laughing, oblivious to the fact that they're standing 3 feet away from a Master Chief Petty Officer who has spent for combat tours keeping people alive under fire, who once held the entire Jolan district in Tikrit from collapsing into complete chaos, who is currently choosing not to destroy their entire understanding of the world. The choice is the only power left to her. She clocks out at 7:52 a.m. and walks toward the parking garage. The Savannah humidity hits her like a physical force, thick and warm and carrying the smell of asphalt and diesel exhaust. Her car is a 2008 Civic with 187,000 miles and a check engine light that's been on for 2 years. She gets in, sits in the driver's seat, and lets her hands rest on the steering wheel. 30 seconds. 60 seconds. 2 minutes. She doesn't move. She doesn't cry. She just sits there, the tarnished coin still in her pocket, her fingernails leaving crescents in her palms, her jaw still locked. But that wasn't the worst part. At 9:15 a.m., while Ashley is trying to sleep in her apartment, a text arrives on her personal phone. It's from Dr. Whitfield's secretary, but the message is his. My office. Monday. 8 a.m. Bring your personal items. You're being escorted out. Consider this your notice to resign by end of business Monday or face termination with cause. The message sits there on her screen. Cold. Certain. The words of a man who has already won, who has already decided her fate, who has already made the calls he needs to make. And Ashley lies in her bed in the darkness of her apartment, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, understanding with absolute clarity that Dr. Whitfield has done this on purpose. He's accelerated the timeline. He's stopped playing the long game. He's moved from humiliation to elimination. Because she started noticing his billing codes. And he's starting to notice that she notices. A Marine physician's assistant named Captain Halloway comes to Cedar Creek Medical on Thursday morning for a joint military medicine conference with the hospital's trauma division. He's there to present on tactical combat casualty care protocols, and he's walking through the ICU at 10:22 a.m. when he sees Ashley inserting a central line into a patient who just arrived post-op from emergency surgery. Her technique is flawless. Her hand positioning is immaculate. She's using the Mosul technique, the precise needle angle and depth that comes from training in field hospitals where you don't have ultrasound and you don't have time and you have exactly one chance to get it right. Halloway freezes mid-step. His mouth opens. He walks closer, watching her work for maybe 10 seconds, watching her thread the guide wire with the kind of surgical precision that belongs to someone trained by the military medical corps, and then he whispers, Mosul technique. Where did you serve? Ashley doesn't look up from her work. She's securing the line now, her movements economical and precise. Wrong person, she says, and her voice is so quiet it's almost not there. Your hands, Halloway says. The scarring. The technique. That's not civilian training. That's... Ashley finishes securing the line. She steps back. She looks at him for maybe 2 seconds, and her eyes are the kind of eyes that have seen things that don't have names, and then she turns and walks away. Just like that. Down the hallway. Out of his immediate orbit. Back to her other patients. She's touching the challenge coin again, her fingers working the edges of it, and Halloway stands there in the middle of the ICU holding a pen and a notebook, understanding suddenly that he has just spoken to someone whose presence he wasn't supposed to acknowledge, someone whose name doesn't exist in any official capacity, someone who has been buried so deep that even seeing her is supposed to be impossible. He doesn't follow her. He just stands there. And then he goes back to the conference room, and he doesn't mention it to anyone. Friday arrives with the weight of a final sentence. At 2:27 p.m., Dr. Whitfield finds Ashley in the medication room, and he closes the door behind him. There are no witnesses. There is no one to hear what he says, which is the entire point. Monday, he says. His voice is calm. His smile is cold and certain. 8 a.m. You resign, you get a neutral reference and severance. You don't resign, I call security. I call the state board. I call federal investigators about your employment history, your credentials verification, your background check. I call everyone. And I make sure you never work in healthcare again. Ashley is standing in front of a cabinet full of 4 medications. Her hands are still. Her face is still. But her jaw is clenched so tight that the muscles along her neck are visible, defined, tense like steel cables. Do you understand me? Whitfield asks. Yes, Ashley says. Her voice is one word. Flat. Empty. Final. Good, Whitfield says. And he leaves. Ashley stands there for 5 minutes. Maybe 10. She's not sure. Time doesn't work the same way anymore. She pulls her hand from her pocket and looks at the challenge coin again. The insignia is almost invisible now, worn away by 6 years of fingertips and fear and the particular burden of existing while dead. That was the last time anyone called her just a nurse. That was the last time she thought she could disappear. The ambulance bay doors crashed open at 9:08 p.m., and the Saturday night silence at Cedar Creek Medical shattered like glass. Paramedics wheeled the stretcher in fast, their movements sharp and practiced, and Ashley heard it before she saw him, the monitor's frantic beeping, the oxygen hiss, the controlled urgency in their voices calling out vitals to the ER attending. Commander James Harding, Navy SEAL, age 42, training accident at Hunter Army Airfield 2 hours north. Blunt force trauma to the left anterior chest wall. Bone fragments from a shattered third rib had driven inward like shrapnel, penetrating the pericardium, the membrane surrounding his heart. The paramedics' report was clinical and damning, Beck's triad developing. Elevated JVP, muffled heart sounds, hypertension. We're looking at early cardiac tamponade. ETA to definitive care was critical. Ashley was first responder, her hands already moving through assessment before the attending finished writing the admission orders. She cut away the trauma dressing, her fingers reading the anatomy beneath, the swelling, the asymmetry, the subtle signs that told her exactly what the monitor was screaming. Blood pressure 80/40 and dropping. Heart rate 142 and climbing. JVD pronounced enough to see from across the room. The commander's eyes were conscious but unfocused, his breathing shallow and labored, his skin the color of wet concrete. Ashley's jaw didn't move. Her hands didn't shake. She'd seen this before, not in a trauma bay, but in a field hospital outside Tikrit while mortar rounds shook the walls and the smell of diesel and copper blood mixed into something that became muscle memory. The ER attending paged surgery immediately. Trauma 3, stat surgical consult, possible pericardiocentesis or thoracotomy. The words crackled through the overhead system and Ashley saw the first surgeon arrive within 5 minutes, Dr. Marcus Chen, chief resident, competent hands and a sharp eye. He reviewed the imaging, saw the penetrating injury, saw the Beck's triad, saw the trajectory of the bone fragments toward the heart chamber. And then he stepped back from the bedside like he'd touched a hot stove. His voice was tight when he spoke, "This is a military case. SEAL team training accident. Liability nightmare. I'm not touching this." He was gone before Ashley could move. The second surgeon didn't even enter trauma 3. Just stood at the doorway, read the chart from 8 feet away, and said quietly, "Transfer to Savannah VA. That's where he belongs. That's where the military handles their own." His footsteps retreated down the hallway before Ashley finished checking the 4 sites. By 10:15 p.m., 10 doctors had been paged, every surgeon on call in Savannah, every specialist who could possibly intervene in a cardiac emergency. Ashley watched each one approach the trauma room and then turn away. The third surgeon lasted 90 seconds inside. "Classified operation?" he asked the attending. When the answer came back uncertain, he shook his head. "I'm not signing up for whatever federal paperwork this brings." The fourth and fifth surgeons consulted with each other in the hallway, their voices low and deliberate, and Ashley heard fragments: "Malpractice insurance won't cover, active duty military, federal jurisdiction, Pentagon gets involved." The sixth surgeon simply walked past the room without stopping, his pace never changing. The room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sound like trapped insects, and Ashley felt the pressure change, the moment when institutional cowardice became as visible as blood on instruments. The commander's monitor showed the deterioration in real time, his blood pressure drifting lower, his heart rate climbing higher, the sinus rhythm beginning to fragment at the edges. 8 minutes. Maybe 7. The tamponade was compressing his heart chambers, crushing the ability to pump, turning his own blood into a weapon against himself. That was when Ashley heard Dr. Whitfield's voice carry from the nurse's station, loud enough to be heard clearly, measured and certain as someone reading a death sentence. Too much risk, no one touches him. Let the VA handle the transfer. He was on the phone, his words clipped and authoritative, speaking to someone with enough institutional power to make surgeons abandon their Hippocratic oaths. Insurance complications. Liability concerns. Federal jurisdiction. Make the calls. I want every surgeon on this floor to understand the exposure. The phone call lasted 43 seconds. The consequences lasted much longer. The seventh surgeon arrived as Whitfield was disconnecting the call. This one had grey at his temples and a reputation for taking the hard cases. He entered Trauma 3 with purpose, spent 2 minutes reading the films, 1 minute assessing the patient, and then turned to the attending with an expression like someone who'd just realized he was walking into an ambush. I received a call from administration. They're concerned about liability. They're also concerned about my malpractice coverage. My insurance company is concerned about active duty military cases. I'm not your surgeon. He left without apologizing. The 8th and 9th surgeons came together, consulted with each other before even entering the room, and left together without speaking to anyone. The 10th surgeon was the chief of surgery himself, a man whose hands had rebuilt 1,000 broken bodies, and he stood in the doorway of Trauma 3 like someone confronting a ghost. He looked at the commander, looked at the monitor showing the steadily deteriorating rhythm, and said quietly to the attending, I got a call from Whitfield. Board-level concerns. State Licensing Board concerns. I have 3 years until retirement. I'm not risking that. He left, and the door to Trauma 3 swung shut with a soft, final sound that echoed through the hallway. Ashley was standing at the bedside, her hand steady, her breath measured, her face the professional mask she'd perfected over 18 years of being invisible. The commander's eyes had found hers at some point in the last 10 minutes, that moment of contact between two people who understood that they were running out of time. His hand moved slightly, just enough to be a question. Ashley nodded once, the same nod she'd given Whitfield on Thursday when he threatened her with security escorts and public humiliation. The difference was that this time, the nod was a promise. That was when she saw Whitfield moving toward her from the nurse's station, his expression satisfied, his phone still in his hand, his stride the relaxed pace of someone who'd just accomplished exactly what he intended. He had security with him, 2 guards whose job was simple and uncomplicated. His voice was pleasant when he reached her, your badge, Nurse Cooper. Security will escort you from the building. Your final check will be mailed. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in the language of professionalism, delivered with the certainty of a man who'd spent the last hour ensuring that Ashley had no allies, no backup, no way to intervene in what was about to happen. Ashley unpinned her badge. She held it out, felt the weight of it for one last second, and handed it over. Her voice came out steady, deferential, the sound of someone who'd accepted the terms of surrender. Of course, Doctor. She turned from the trauma room, walked with the security guards toward the exit, felt her access cards being deactivated by the time she reached the elevator, felt the doors closing on 18 years of being the person that no one noticed. The monitor in Trauma 3 was still visible from the hallway, the rhythm fragmenting further, the blood pressure dropping below 60 systolic, the baseline flatline drawing closer with every second that passed. The commander had 4 minutes left. Maybe 3. No surgeons. No hope. No one standing between him and the cardiac arrest that was rolling toward him like an avalanche in slow motion. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Ashley Cooper, Master Chief Petty Officer, Combat Medic, the woman who'd held 19 lives together with her hands in conditions that would have broken normal people, was being escorted out of the only place where she could save him. The trauma room door locked with a click that sounded like a rifle bolt. Ashley's hands were already moving, 18-gauge needle, the subxiphoid approach, 45 degrees toward the left shoulder, the same trajectory she'd memorized 8 years ago when mortar rounds were shaking the walls of a field hospital outside Tikrit and there were no doctors left alive to help. She didn't look at the monitor. She didn't need to. She could read Beck's triad in the commander's face, the distended neck veins, the muffled heart sounds, the blood pressure that had dropped to somewhere between dead and dying. 8 minutes. Maybe less. The needle was already prepped. She'd grabbed the kit from the supply room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this in the dark, in the rain, in conditions that would have broken normal people. Her mind wasn't in Savannah anymore. Her mind was in a concrete bunker with blast tape on the windows and the smell of diesel fuel mixing with something that might have been blood or might have been fear. She couldn't remember anymore. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of scrubbing that out of her hands every single shift. Ashley. The commander's voice was barely a whisper. His eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow, his oxygen saturation dropping like a stone. 68, 64, 61. The monitor's beep had become a death rattle. What are you? Don't talk. Her voice was level. Steady. The voice of someone who'd held too many lives in her hands to let the trembling start now. This is going to feel like pressure. She positioned the needle at the angle, felt the resistance of skin and then the sudden give as the needle entered the pericardial sac. The membrane around his heart had filled with blood, 60 cubic centimeters of it, maybe more, and every heartbeat was losing ground against the weight of it. She pulled the syringe plunger back and the needle hub filled with dark red blood, the color of old pennies, the color of failure if she hesitated even 1 second. The blood came out in a steady draw. 10 cubic centimeters, 20 cubic centimeters. The commander's chest expanded slightly, his breathing less desperate, his oxygen climbing, 65, 71, 78. She could hear the change in the monitor's rhythm, the spacing between beeps widening, the desperation shifting to something that resembled a heartbeat instead of a scream. She pulled another 30 cubic centimeters and then watched the numbers climb to 88, to 92, to something that looked like survival. The commander's eyes fluttered open and locked directly onto hers, and in that moment something shifted in his expression, a widening of the pupils, a halt in the breath, recognition moving across his face like a shock wave. "You're the ghost," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, shaped by pain and blood loss and something that sounded like awe. "The Master Chief they buried." We were told you were." The knock on the trauma room door was hard. Demanding. The security guard's voice came through muffled, panic creeping in at the edges. "You need to unlock this door now." But that wasn't the voice that made her hands stop moving. It was Whitfield's voice, right behind the guard, cold and certain. "Cooper, open this door or I will have it cut open. You are fired. Effective immediately. Your badge is deactivated. This patient is being transferred to Savannah Regional. Step away from him now." Ashley didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge the door, the voice, the words that were supposed to mean something. She placed a pressure bandage over the needle site with movements that were automatic, surgical, the way a programmer moves across a keyboard. The commander's eyes were still locked on hers and they were saying something she couldn't quite hear over the sound of her own heartbeat, which was still working, still steady, still controlled. "You saved my life," the commander said. "In Mosul. When the IED took out, you were there. You stopped the bleeding. You kept me talking. I remember your voice." She didn't answer. There was nothing to answer anymore. The door was being shouldered now, the security guard pushing from the outside, and she could hear Whitfield's voice on his phone, already calling someone else, already building the next layer of consequence. She placed one more piece of tape on the bandage with the precision of someone applying a surgical closure and then she turned to face the door. The security guard stumbled through first, followed by Whitfield, who was holding her badge in his hand like a trophy. Behind him, she could see another nurse already clearing her locker from the station, clothes, personal effects, the photograph of her mother that she'd kept in the corner for 3 years. Everything erased. Everything reduced to property that needed to be disposed of. "Remove yourself from this patient immediately," Whitfield said. His smile was a thing without teeth, without warmth, pure satisfaction. "I'm calling the board. I'm calling the state. I'm having you arrested for practicing beyond scope." Everything you have done in this hospital is now under investigation, and you will never work in medicine again." Ashley didn't respond. She didn't look at him. She looked at the commander, whose oxygen saturation was now 95, whose heart rate was 72 and steady, whose pupils were equal and reactive, and looking at her like she was something that had been buried and was now unexpectedly, impossibly, alive. She stepped away from the bedside and walked toward the door with movements that were slow, deliberate, and completely empty of anything that might have been fear or anger or anything human at all. The hallway was already full. 2 more nurses were removing her name from the staff board. A hospital administrator was photographing her nursing station, documenting the removal. Whitfield was already on his phone again, already starting the next conversation, already moving on to the next person he could break. He didn't even look at her as she passed him. 2 hours later, she was sitting alone in her car in the basement parking garage of Cedar Creek Medical, the engine dead because she'd turned it off before she got in and couldn't find the energy to turn it back on. The steering wheel was cold under her forehead. The parking garage smelled like oil and concrete and the particular loneliness of people who'd made a choice to be alone. She still had the tarnished challenge coin in her scrub pocket. She could feel it there, pressed against her hip, the weight of it familiar and wrong and like proof of something she'd spent 6 years trying not to be. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper. Ghost. The woman who'd held 19 lives together with her hands in conditions that would have broken normal people. The woman who'd been ordered to disappear. The woman who'd actually managed it, right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. Her phone was dead. The hospital had disabled her badge access, so she couldn't even get back in if she wanted to. She was sitting in a car with a dead engine in a basement parking garage in Savannah, Georgia, and she couldn't remember why she'd ever thought she could stop being invisible. She couldn't remember what it had felt like to be seen. She couldn't remember if she'd ever been anything other than this, the quiet person in the room, the one nobody noticed, the one who saved lives and then walked away like it cost her nothing. The rain started without warning, hammering against the windshield like applause for a performance nobody was watching. She pressed her forehead harder against the steering wheel and let the weight of 6 years of invisibility settle back down on her shoulders like a uniform she couldn't take off, like a rank she'd never actually left behind, like the truth she'd been running from since the day the Navy told her to disappear. The commander had recognized her. That was the problem. That was the thing that couldn't be taken back. He'd seen past the scrubs and the hospital badge and the carefully constructed version of Ashley Cooper, RN, barely qualified staff member. He'd seen the Master Chief. And now the world knew. Everything was about to change. The rotor wash started at 8:24 a.m. Not loud at first, a distant throb that made the fluorescent lights hum differently, a frequency that made your bones remember things your brain wanted to forget. Ashley stood in the corner of Cedar Creek Medical's main atrium, hand steady, watching Dr. Whitfield arrange his Monday morning theater. 200 staff members stood clustered around the marble floor, phones out, coffee cooling in their hands. He'd called a mandatory meeting. New protocols, he'd announced. Unauthorized care would no longer be tolerated. Preventive measures to protect the hospital from liability. His voice had that satisfied edge, the sound of a man who'd just deleted a problem. The throb got louder. Ashley felt it in her sternum before she heard it. That particular vibration that meant heavy rotors, military weight, the kind of aircraft that carried people who didn't ask permission. A Black Hawk. She knew that sound the way other people knew their mother's voice. The skylights above the atrium began to vibrate. Papers fluttered off the reception desk. Someone said, "What the?" but nobody finished. For naval officers in dress uniforms appeared at the main entrance. Not running. Not hurrying. Walking with the kind of measured precision that made hospital staff instinctively step aside. The lead officer, a tall captain with silver oak leaves on his shoulder, approached the front desk. His voice cut through the ambient noise like a scalpel through tissue. "We're looking for Master Chief Cooper. Call sign Ghost." The atrium went absolutely still. The kind of silence that happened in operating rooms right before someone flatlined. Dr. Whitfield's face went pale. He'd expected this day would never come. that Ashley would have signed the resignation papers by now, that she'd have disappeared back into whatever invisible corner of the world she'd crawled out of. He hadn't expected a Black Hawk on his rooftop. Torres stepped forward. The hospital's security chief was a former Marine gunnery sergeant with the kind of face that had seen things, the kind of posture that never forgot chain of command. His voice carried through the two-story atrium with parade ground clarity. "You're looking for Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, United States Navy, Navy Cross recipient, 3 combat tours, 19 confirmed saves under fire." People started whispering. Phones came out. The girl who'd been emptying bedpans, who'd been barely qualified, who'd made spelling errors in her charting, she was a Navy Cross recipient. Whitfield's jaw clenched. His hands opened and closed. The Admiral came through the doors last. 2 stars on his collar, a tablet held at his side like a weapon. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The room's oxygen seemed to thin just from his presence. He walked directly to the center of the atrium, directly to where Whitfield stood, and began reading from the tablet in a voice that sounded like it was coming through a secure radio from somewhere very far away. Silver Star with V device for Vela. Tikrit, 2016. Second Silver Star for Mosul operation. For Bronze Stars with Combat Distinguishing Device. Navy Cross for classified operation, details sealed at the Pentagon level. He paused. Looked up. Medical specialty, combat trauma surgery, forward operating conditions. Classification level, TSSCI. The hospital attorney, a woman named Brennan, went the color of old paper. She was whispering something to the hospital administrator. TSSCI meant top secret sensitive compartmented information. That wasn't a personnel file. That was a national security file. "Where is she?" the Admiral asked quietly. Before anyone could answer, Commander Harding appeared in the doorway. He was in a wheelchair, still too weak to walk, the foot still in his arm, a naval corpsman in dress blues pushing him. His chest was bandaged under his uniform, but his eyes were completely alert. Completely present. He stopped the wheelchair at the edge of the gathering and his voice came out clean and strong. Master Chief Cooper was declared killed in action 6 years ago. That wasn't an accident. He paused. Let that sink in. She was declared KIA to protect an operation that saved 200 American lives. The Navy ordered her to disappear, erased her from every database, gave her a new identity. She's been hiding because we commanded her to hide. The silence stretched like pulled taffy. Saturday night, the commander continued, "I came into this hospital with bone fragments embedded in my pericardium. 10 doctors, I counted them as they walked past my room, as they refused to touch me. 10 doctors because this man made phone calls." He pointed directly at Dr. Whitfield. He told them the liability was too high. He told them to let me wait for the VA transfer. He told them I wasn't their problem. The Admiral turned to face Whitfield. The motion was small, deliberate, and it looked like a predator deciding which angle to attack from. "You're terminated effective immediately," the Admiral said. His voice had the texture of concrete and winter. "Your fraudulent billing scheme, the phantom codes you've been running through the ICU for 18 months, just became a federal matter involving a military facility transfer agreement. Since Commander Harding was stabilized at this facility and subsequently transferred via military protocol, your billing practices are now under investigation by the Office of Naval Intelligence. You'll want to contact a lawyer before anyone else asks questions." Whitfield's face went from pale to red to the color of old bruises. He opened his mouth. Closed it. The room wasn't just watching him anymore, the room was watching him come apart. His hands were shaking now. His breathing had gone shallow and fast. Those codes were approved by the board." "No," the Admiral said simply. "They weren't. We've had your financial records for 6 hours. Your house in Habersham County was purchased 3 years ago for $847,000. Your salary doesn't match. Neither do your car payments, your country club fees, or the private school tuition for your daughter. We'll let federal prosecutors explain the math. The hospital administrator was on his phone now, whispering frantically. Security officers were standing motionless, uncertain whether they worked for the hospital anymore or whether the Navy had just conscripted them. Someone in the crowd of staff members was filming everything on their phone. But Ashley wasn't watching Whitfield. She'd moved through the crowd without anyone noticing, and now she was looking at Commander Harding. His eyes found hers across the room. There was something in his expression that looked like it might be gratitude, or maybe it looked like memory, the kind of thing two people only understood if they'd been in the dark together, if they'd held life and death in their hands at the same time. The Admiral's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at the gathered staff. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper is on temporary medical administrative leave effective immediately. Her security clearance is being reinstated. Her records are being unsealed. She will be offered restoration to active duty status at the rank of Senior Chief Petty Officer with back pay dating to her nominal KIA date, or she will be offered a position as Clinical Director of Veteran Services at this facility, whichever she chooses. He paused. The choice is hers. It's always been hers. That's what the last 6 years were about. Choice. The atrium had gone so quiet you could hear the rotor wash outside, still rotating slowly on the rooftop, keeping the engines warm. You could hear the ventilators in the ICU 3 floors up, breathing for people who couldn't. You could hear the rain that had started falling on the skylights, that old reliable Savannah rain that came without warning and stayed until it was finished. Torres looked at Ashley and nodded once. Military to military. The acknowledgement of something that had been invisible finally becoming visible. The people around her were starting to understand, the girl who'd moved through their hospital like a ghost, who'd never spoken up in meetings, who'd accepted every insult and every dismissal without complaint. That girl was something else entirely. Had always been something else. They'd just been too busy looking at her uniform, the scrubs, the badge, the temporary name tag, to see what was underneath. The Admiral extended his hand toward Ashley. She walked across the atrium and shook it. "Welcome back, Master Chief," he said quietly. Only she could hear it. "Sir," she replied. 10-word maximum wasn't just a conversation rule with her anymore. It was a way of being. Precision. Efficiency. Respect for the weight of words. "Thank you, sir." The commander was crying now, the silent kind, the kind men who'd been to war and back learn how to do so nobody has to acknowledge it. His corpsman handed him a tissue. Around them, the hospital staff was beginning to move again, to whisper, to process. Someone was definitely calling local news. The insurance company was going to have to explain why their newest employee had been a 2-star Admiral's choice for termination. But Ashley didn't move. She stood in the center of the atrium, surrounded by fluorescent light and the hum of machines and the sound of rain on glass, and she pulled the tarnished challenge coin from her scrub pocket. The one from Tikrit. The one she'd carried through 6 years of being invisible. She turned it over in her palm, felt the weight of it, not much, maybe an ounce, but heavy in a way that had nothing to do with physics. The commander was looking at her. She walked over to his wheelchair and placed the coin in his hand. His fingers closed around it immediately. Understanding passed between them, the kind that didn't need words, the kind that only came from having survived things together, from having pulled each other back from the edge. "I need coffee," Ashley said to no one in particular, and walked toward the break room. Behind her, the atrium remained perfectly still for exactly 4 more seconds. Then Torres smiled, a small, lethal smile that suggested he'd always known exactly who was walking past his security desk every single day. By Thursday afternoon, Ashley drove past the strip mall across from Cedar Creek Medical, and there he was. Dr. Whitfield sat hunched at a folding table under a banner that flapped in the Savannah wind like something wounded, discount insurance, quotes while you wait printed in letters that were already peeling. His expensive suit was gone. In its place, a cheap polo shirt with sweat stains spreading from his collar. His hand shook as he waved at passing cars. Nobody stopped. Ashley sat in her car for exactly 12 seconds, watching him. This was the man who had orchestrated the impossible, called in favors to 10 surgeons, leveraged connections to the state licensing board, fabricated insurance complications to make one patient too radioactive to touch. This was the man who had smiled at her with certainty, who had threatened security escorts, whose voice had carried through the atrium with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never lost a game. Now he was waving at strangers from a folding table, and the cars kept driving past. She didn't feel what she expected to feel. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just the weight of something that had been lifted and the strange quiet that comes after a battle ends. The federal charges had come fast, 18 months of phantom billing codes, $2.3 million in false charges, every ICU admission he'd inflated cross-referenced against actual procedures performed. The FBI had moved on Tuesday. By Wednesday, his medical license was suspended. By Thursday morning, federal indictment. By Thursday afternoon, he was selling car insurance to people who didn't want it from a folding table that wobbled every time the wind picked up. Ashley pressed her palm against the steering wheel, feeling the shape of the challenge coin in her scrub pocket, not her own this time. The commander's coin. His own, from Tikrit, from the mission where she'd held his fire team together with tourniquets and prayer and hands that didn't shake even when the mortar rounds hit so close the concussion knocked her backward into a sandbag wall. He'd kept that coin for 6 years. 6 years of knowing she was alive, knowing she was out there somewhere, and he'd kept his mouth shut because that's what the Navy had ordered. That's what honor looks like when nobody's watching. Friday morning arrived clean and bright. Ashley stood in the hospital CEO's office, and for the first time in 4 days, she wasn't standing in trouble. She was standing in a future that didn't exist 48 hours ago. The credentials hung around her neck on a lanyard, not the faded hospital badge anymore, but new laminate, pristine embossing, A. Cooper, Clinical Director, Veteran Services. The words felt strange and necessary, like the first time you breathe after nearly drowning. The CEO was stammering through an apology again. Master Chief Cooper, the hospital deeply regrets the circumstances. Ashley held up one hand. Save it. You need a veteran liaison program. Trauma protocols that account for military physiology. Someone to coordinate with the Navy on cases like Commander Harding's. I'm doing that job now. That's the only apology that matters. The CEO nodded, relief flooding his face. He was the kind of man who would have fired her without hesitation if Whitfield had succeeded. Now he was handing her a key to an office on the 3rd floor. Commander Harding was waiting in that office when she arrived. He'd been discharged that morning, still pale, still moving carefully, but alive because of 7 minutes and 60 cubic centimeters of blood pulled from around his heart. He stood when she entered, something formal and old-fashioned in the gesture. His arm was still bandaged, the pericardial catheter long gone, but his eyes were sharp and tracking her like a target he'd already memorized. Master Chief, he said, and it wasn't a greeting. It was a recognition. Sir. Ashley closed the door behind her. You kept that challenge coin 6 years. He didn't ask. He stated it, the way operators do when they've already confirmed something through a surveillance pattern. We didn't know if you'd kept your own. Nobody kept their copy. The op is still classified. The briefings were burned. We were ordered to forget you existed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a coin, scarred brass, the eagle rubbed smooth from 6 years in a cargo pocket. This is from Tikrit. This is what you were. I've carried it the entire time because men don't forget who holds them together while mortars are falling. You saved my fire team. You saved 19 lives. And then you disappeared, and I never knew your name until Monday when that Navy Cross came out of an admiral's classified file. Ashley took the coin. Its weight was immediate and familiar and entirely different from her own, which was stored in a drawer she'd hidden under her apartment bathroom sink. You've kept this the whole time. The question was stupid and necessary. Every single day. Harding's voice was smooth as professional distance allows. The Admiral said you saved me because you didn't stop. Because you didn't look up from the work when the noise got louder. That's what he said. That's the difference between a Master Chief and everyone else in that room. You don't stop. Even when 10 doctors walk away. Even when the system tries to bury you. You don't stop. Ashley closed her hand around both coins now. One that had been hers, waiting in a bathroom drawer for 6 years. One that had belonged to a man she'd never thought she'd see again, carrying her memory like a weight and a weapon and a promise. She looked out the window of her new office and saw the strip mall. The folding table was still there, empty now, the banner still flapping. Dr. Whitfield was probably inside, doing whatever it is that broken men do when they've lost everything that mattered. She turned back to Harding. I need to build something here. Veteran intake screening. Protocols for military trauma. I need the Navy to send us their cases, not because Cedar Creek is special, but because we'll have someone here who understands the difference between a standard patient and a human being who's already survived things that would kill ordinary people. Her voice had changed. It was the voice of someone who'd stopped asking permission. I need resources, autonomy, and I need you to never call me sir again because I'm not active duty, and if I ever have to salute in a hospital, I'll start shooting. Harding smiled then. Genuinely smiled. The kind of smile that acknowledges something dangerous and necessary and entirely sane. I'll make that call to my command. He extended his hand. Welcome back, Master Chief. Ashley shook it. Her grip was exactly as steady as it had been under fire. By the time the weekend arrived, the Veteran Services Clinic had a location, a sun-filled space on the second floor that overlooked the garden, not the strip mall. The Marine physician's assistant from the vending machine appeared in her doorway Saturday morning, carrying equipment catalogs like offerings to a shrine. Master Chief, we're setting up the clinic. Figured you'd want input on trauma bays, imaging priorities, isolation protocols for patients experiencing triggers. He said it as a statement, not a question, because by now everyone in Cedar Creek Medical knew exactly who they were talking to. Ashley sat at her new desk, solid oak, not regulation issue, and looked at the catalogs. Then she looked at the challenge coins on her desk, arranged like evidence. Hers, dusty from 6 years of hiding. The commander's, still bright where it had been gripped in a pocket close to his heart for every single day. The isolation protocols matter most, she said. We need to be able to control sensory input, sound dampening, lighting that doesn't strobe, rooms that don't echo like military facilities. We're treating people whose bodies learn to fight in spaces that try to kill them. Their nervous systems don't understand the difference between Cedar Creek and Kandahar. We acknowledge that. We build for it. The Marine PA nodded, writing faster. How do you know that? Because my body's the same, Ashley said quietly. I can walk down a hallway that smells like antiseptic and my hands still think I'm in a trauma tent. The difference is I know what's happening. Most of our patients won't. So we build a space where the baseline doesn't scream at them. He left with a list that would reshape the hospital's approach to veteran care, and Ashley stood at her window watching the city wake up on a Saturday that felt like it belonged to someone else. The credentials on her desk caught the morning light. The challenge coins caught it too. She picked them both up, one in each palm, and felt the weight of 6 years and 6 minutes and the exact moment when invisible became essential. Her phone buzzed. A text from the vending machine. The Marine PA's name was Garrett, she'd learned, with a photo of the trauma bay under construction. The caption read, "First patient comes Monday." Ready. Ashley looked at her reflection in the window. Same face. Same hands. But the eyes were different. The eyes were looking back at a woman who'd stopped pretending. She pressed both coins against her palm one final time and allowed herself to smile. Not the professional smile she'd worn for 4 days of humiliation. Not the composed smile she'd offered when 10 doctors walked away from a dying man. This smile was different. This smile was the first real expression of someone who'd been told to disappear and then spent 6 years in the business of saving lives while remaining invisible, and who now, finally, impossibly, got to stop hiding. Power is not a title, she whispered to her reflection, fingers closing around the coins. Power is the ability to help. She pocketed both coins and turned toward the hallway, where her team was waiting to build something new. The Veteran Services Clinic opened Monday morning with Ashley Cooper standing at its entrance, credential hanging at her throat, 2 challenge coins pressed against her heart beneath her scrubs. The first patient came in at 0800 hours, a Marine from Camp Lejeune experiencing flashbacks from an IED incident, his nervous system screaming for help in a space that smelled like antiseptic and sounded like peace. Ashley greeted him by name, by rank, by the exact caliber of respect that only someone who's been there understands. The room she'd built for him didn't echo. The lighting didn't strobe. The soundproofing absorbed the ambient hospital noise that had plagued every other veteran who'd come through Cedar Creek's doors. She spent 6 hours with him. 6 hours of talking and listening and understanding the difference between what a patient says and what their body is actually screaming. By discharge time, he was stable, grounded, and he looked at her with the specific recognition that only comes when one veteran meets another. "You know," he said, walking toward the exit. "You really do understand." Ashley didn't correct him. She didn't explain the 6 years of hiding or the pericardiocentesis or the 10 doctors or the folding table across the street. She just nodded and made a note in his chart: stable, requires follow-up in 72 hours, recommend continued environmental accommodation protocols. If anyone had looked through the windows of Cedar Creek Medical that afternoon, they would have seen an unremarkable nurse at an unremarkable desk in an unremarkable hospital. They would have missed the transformation entirely. The invisible woman had finally been made visible, not to the world at large, but to the people who mattered, the ones who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who understood the specific gravity of staying quiet while the noise got louder. The ones who understood that power isn't a title at all. Power is knowing who you are when nobody's watching, and then becoming that person so completely that the world finally has no choice but to see you. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real value, if you've ever wanted to tell a bully exactly what you think but chose professionalism instead, if you've ever wondered what happens when a hidden hero finally gets to stop hiding, subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories coming, stories about people who carried secrets that could change everything. And comment below, have you ever been in Ashley's position, where staying quiet was the only way to stay strong?